fuimos compañeros de clase. Y mira qué bien que estoy. Cuando estábamos en Northwestern, alguien tenía que ser el que decía, no, that's not what you said before. Let's get this right. Buenos días, bienvenidos a Miami. Ricardo, gracias por invitarme, pero me has pedido algo que yo nunca hago. Yo nunca hablo de filosofía. Yo soy un tipo que trabajé en periódicos casi toda mi vida, y en un periódico uno hace y después, si acaso, habla de lo que hizo o de lo que voy a hacer mañana, la historia de mañana, la historia de hoy, el periódico, las cosas que hay que arreglar en este momento, no la filosofía de qué estamos haciendo. Así es que esto para mí es un poco nuevo, y con su permiso lo voy a hablar en inglés, porque en inglés lo escribí y aún en inglés me dejó a mí un poquito confundido. So this is an attempt to discuss a philosophy of approaching news and community. And I am not here to say how you should run a newspaper or how you should even think about running a newspaper. I'm here only to talk to you about how I think about news, how I think about news and community, how I think about our role in society, and how we have changed Knight Foundation over the course of the last 10 years. What are the influences that have gone into that? Let me start with a confession. I come to this I come at the business of news not as a journalist. I am not a journalist. In fact, my son, who once was a journalist at the Associated Press, one time was stuck on a story, and Susana, my wife, his mother, we was talking to her, and she said, I'm not sure what to do with this story. And she said, well, why don't you ask your father? And he said, why would I do that? And she said, well, he's in the same business. I said, Mom, Pop is a lawyer who runs a newspaper. I'm a journalist. So I'm not allowed at home to pretend that I'm a journalist. But I do come at it based on three deeply held principles. One is that democratic systems are the best form of government for the greatest common good. I believe that. Two, no one has a corner on truth, so more speech is better than less speech, and free speech is best of all. Three, informed communities can best determine their own interest and become engaged communities, safeguarding the democracy that looks out for the greatest good. Informed and engaged communities. Journalism and the news business are essential tools toward that democratic vision. They are essential parts. They are a business that I've loved all my life. And those of you who knew me knew how much I loved it, how much I lived it. I had an extraordinary bit of luck in working in three great newspapers in Hartford and New York, and then here in Miami, where I was publisher of two newspapers. We were, frankly, and not boastfully, but we were tremendously profitable. In my last year, Alberto was with me, helping me make a pile of money that we sent to Knight Ridder. In my last year as publisher, which was only 2004, just think about how much the world has changed, we had 24.9% profit. We won a Pulitzer Prize. We were in Knight Ridder's survey. We were the top-rated newspaper in the Knight Ridder chain, and we were the one with the top scores for employees. I loved it. And all that time, it was clear to me, or at that time, it was clear to me that the digital transformation was taking a huge share of audience, though not yet at that time a share of dollars. I had a deep belief that we were in the business of news, not the business of printing on paper. We had lost the balance of mission and business. when the Knights ran the papers, I must say, I'm obviously going back to exaggerate the point, there was a clear balance between the mission of informing and the business of making money, and we had lost that balance, and the stock market analysts, in my view, had become a more important constituent of the newspaper company than the readers and the communities that we served. That was a path toward the end of the model. There was no clear path forward in the digital age, and I really did think it was about to implode. I was worried because Yogi Berra always says the right thing, and Yogi Berra had said, if the fans don't want to come to the ballpark, nobody can stop them. So I felt the fans were not coming to the ballpark, and I didn't see any way that we were going to stop them. I didn't leave because of that. I left because I had an opportunity to go to Knight Foundation, and when I arrived at Knight, I thought it was a terrific chance to try to experiment with some things that I'd been thinking about that I wasn't able to do, that I think probably most of you cannot do. It's not that you wouldn't want to, it's that the exigencies of your business may not let you do. But we at Knight had, at the point when I joined 10 years ago, we had just done almost 24 endowed chairs of journalism, some of them very distinguished and sitting in front of me, Rosenthal Alves, I am proud to say. But the underlying principle of an endowed chair of journalism is that you are going to take the best people, make them Knight chairs, have them teach best practices, and I thought, wait, we're teaching best practices for a world we don't understand. How can you teach best practices? Isn't it better at this point in our evolution? Isn't it better to begin an experiment, to begin to look at what causes transformation? What are the characteristics of transformation? And we began that way. We began by looking at what is needed for transformation and the 5 characteristics that are found in just about any transformational change: discovery, vision, courage, talent, and tenacity. Discovery, which is journalism, which is dealing with the facts as they are, not as you wish they were. The newsrooms are littered with editors who wish that we were back in 1975 or 1980 when we had such a huge share of audience and such a huge share of advertising dollars. Vision, to understand, to see what others see and yet understand it differently. The courage to stand up and do it. The talent that you either have or get. And most of all, the tenacity to stick to it. Inspiration for me as I approached Knight Foundation came from different places, and I'm going to go out on a limb here and hope that you don't think I'm completely crazy, but simply tell you that this is the truth. What helped me think about how to approach the work of experimentation at Knight Foundation were, among others, 3 people. One is John Cage, who is a composer and thinker, who in the middle part of the 20th century, I think, inspired most of the most important American artists. Cage was a believer in chance and in the wisdom of crowds long before Clay Shirky had ever thought about writing his book or coining the phrase. Mies van der Rohe, the architect, and Piet Mondrian, the painter. I'm not saying this now in hindsight. At the time, in 2007, I wrote a memo to some members of our staff, and I sent two images. This was one, as 2 examples of how I think about our work and concepts, both from the early 1920s. I sent this charcoal drawing of a glass-clad skyscraper by Mies van der Rohe, and a painting by Mondrian. Each man saw the world not as it was, but as it could be. misunderstood the new technology that allowed him to transform buildings of stone into, well, actually, if you could go, can you go back to the previous, so understood the new technology that allowed him to transform stone into airy, light-filled glass enclosures, using, and this is the part that is about newspapers, using the technology of the day to transform how we think about our environment, using the technology of the day to transform how we think about news, how we think about audience engagement. Look at the building on the right in the black and white charcoal drawing, and understand that was the technology of one time. The technology of the day allowed Mies to imagine the building on the right. And if you go to the Mondrian slide, Mondrian painted at the juncture of the spiritual and the material. It's a place where one makes grants if you are trying to change minds and hearts, spiritual and material. He abstracted natural forms to create planes of primary colors and straight lines, with the horizontal elements intended to represent material and the vertical elements spiritual. Through painting, he promoted a reconciliation between the individual and the collective, and these themes are essential to transformational grant making. I know I'm on thin ice here. I understand that because you are supremely practical people. You gather news, you print it on cheap paper, and you sell it for almost nothing. But the challenge is not about what was or even about what is, but about imagining what is going to be. And Cage, Mies, and Mondrian are relevant to the world as it is going to be, the world of the Internet of Things. My friend Joichi Ito, if you could move to the slide on, has created this very handy guide, these principles for managing in the world of Internet. And if you think about these, you can note especially the ones I would highlight: push over pull, demand over hard sell, engagement of the crowd and of the reader, resilience over strength. What does this say about the flexibility, and what is the commentary on the inflexibility of printing presses that we used to think of as a strength, as a barrier to entry, now are an albatross around our neck? Compass over maps, and this is my favorite one because I think it's the most honest. It says that we can't say with precision where we're going. We have a direction and maybe even a goal to inform community, but we cannot have a map. So stop looking for one, use instead a compass. Deal with facts as they are, acknowledge the challenges, embrace innovation and experiment. Marty Barron of the Washington Post talked not long ago about abandoning sentiment in thinking about newspapers, and know that the pace of change will only get faster, and that the only certainty is that if we continue the current course, we will die. So how does that then end up changing the foundation? In the first place, we have shifted our focus from charity to social investing. We were created out of a sense of obligation, and we have shifted to a point where in charity, when you make a contribution, that's the end. In social investing, like any other investor, you want a return. We have changed our focus as a foundation. Instead of looking for good works, we are looking for good, sustainable opportunities to continue impacting in society. We've moved from the funding of established practices, from the teaching of best practices, to the funding of innovation, looking for answers that fit the new technology. The number of grants that we make has increased, I'd say probably threefold, and the size of the dollars of each grant has plummeted. An endowed chair used to cost $1.5 million or $2 million. We are now making dozens and dozens and dozens of grants that are $25,000, $30,000, looking for experimenting to see what will people use, what devices will people use, How will they use them? Remember, it wasn't long ago that we all thought this was a phone. How will they use the devices, and how will they value the information depending on where it came from? How do you value information? Thinking back to a previous technology, how did you value information that came on print versus information that you heard on radio or information that you saw on television? The principles are the same, except now we're talking about internet. Instead of funding answers, we seek to fund questions. And maybe someday we'll end up being back in best practices. One of the things that we found as we have begun to fund a number of nonprofit news organizations is that they are cropping up, that they are experimenting. So we actually are supporting about 15% of the budget of about 30 nonprofit news organizations around the United States. It's one of the consequences of the kind of funding that we're doing now, and we're doing it not because we think they have the answer, but because we think it's important that they continue the experiment to figure out what the answer will be. How funding a lot of experiments in mobile, we find interesting changes from the time that I was in the newspaper business. It was an unusual thing for a newspaper to rely on events as a major moneymaker, and yet if you look at the Texas Tribune, which is probably the most profitable of the strictly online news operations, events is a major part of their income stream. Engagement, I think nobody that I've seen has really cracked engagement with the audience, how to intelligently include that audience into the news process, either in the selection of news or in the commenting of news. We've funded a number of experiments in that, starting with Spot.us 9 or 10 years ago, to more recently trying to ProPublica with their very high quality journalism and the kind of engagement that they allow the reader to personalize news. I remember when they ran a story on doctors who took money from pharma for which drugs they would recommend. The first thing I did was quickly type in the name of my doctor to see if he was one of those people. That was he was not, by the way. That was engagement. That is being generous. Shell Israel years ago said something that has stuck with me forever, and since then, and that is that the most successful people on the web are the most generous. If you let me use your data, if you let me use your technology, if you let me personalize it in ways that I care about, I will care about you, I will come back to you. And if you think about it, who is more successful at this than Google? And what does their front page look like? It is nothing, it is blank. There's only a rectangle that basically says, what do you want to do? Not what do I want? It's all about them, actually. But what they present is, what do you want to do? And that is hugely important. We have funded recently, we funded programs with the Washington Post, and this is something that's new. We've begun to work with for-profit organizations simply because obviously there's no corner on the market in nonprofits on what the future is going to be. And so the issue of commenting, the issue of how to engage audience in the actual discussion of the news is important, and we've made a grant to the Washington Post, the New York Times, and Mozilla to develop a commenting platform that will allow newspapers to easily, efficiently, inexpensively to identify participants and engage them in commentary, although that still will be after the fact. The Post and the Times were already thinking about this. We entered and brought in Mozilla to ensure that it is open source, and when it's done, will be available to anyone who wants to use it. We funded an innovation laboratory recently at The Guardian, and all the while, and the Guardian US, and the reason for that is that they were simply doing some of the most interesting experiments in how to reach out to audiences anywhere. All the while, we've continued with our commitments to the Knight Chairs in Journalism, the Carnegie Knight initiative to reform and modernize journalism education, and literally dozens of other projects. In terms of tools, I'd say we've had less success in terms of figuring out what tools to fund. Document Cloud, however, was one that we funded and perhaps many of you might have used. It was developed at ProPublica and the New York Times, and a program called Madison that allows communities to see in real time how legislation is being actually written. And that's not a pipe dream. If you think about legislation, you think about closed rooms, the ultimate closed meeting. In fact, the city of Chicago and the folks who developed Madison just signed a memorandum of understanding last week. And if Chicago can be open about its legislation, anybody can do it. So I think there's real hope there. And the reason for optimism, it seems to me, and the reason why we are, we moved away to some extent from the funding of the traditional journalism and into the funding of media innovation, and now are coming back, which is one of the reasons I was happy to be back here. We're now coming back to looking at what will happen in news media, to funding in journalism, looking for experiments within newsrooms, and in part, it's because of the change that has happened in newsrooms. Over the course of the last 10 years, we simply have new people who are digital natives, who are willing and able to think in a very different way. We expect to do more prototype funding. In September, we will announce a series of grants that will be experiments in for-profit newsrooms across the country. And in the fall, and this is probably a little bit premature to talk about, but in the fall we will announce the creation of a major institute for the defense of free speech at a university. But when discussing the digital transformation, the focus too often is on the actual changes, and frankly, that misses the point. The biggest changes the biggest change in the digital age is that it really does require a new way of thinking, and that's why I included John Cage and Mies van der Rohe and Piet Mondrian, because we have to challenge ourselves. We have to look at how visionary thinkers thought about their world and apply those same principles to what we do. And it isn't that far afield. Journalists all over the world come to work not knowing exactly what they will report that day. Be open to learning a new way of doing things every day. Do what Jack Knight used to say he wanted to be known as a guy who printed good newspapers, was open-minded, fair, and opinionated. That's really not a bad way to be in the digital world. I thank you for your attention, and I wish you a great conference here in Miami. Thanks.